my daughter, Olivia, who's 18, and I stood there on the porch, watching as my wife, Julia, and my boss, Samuel, loaded her suitcases into his car. He'd shown up early on a Sunday morning, ready to take her to a meeting in New York the next day. They needed to catch a flight that evening for more meetings. It was all so routine for them, like it didn't even faze them. Julia, even at 44, still had it. She stood 5 feet 7 inches, with striking black hair and those piercing emerald eyes. The extra pounds she'd put on over the years didn't seem to bother her. Not when she still had the curves that caught everyone's attention. We'd gotten married right after high school, and I'd worked my tail off to put her through college while juggling my own online classes. Having kids didn't change her figure. She bounced back just fine. After she finished law school, we moved back closer to family, already with 2 kids in tow. Olivia had been born during Julia's first year as a practicing attorney. Seeing Samuel standing there, smirking like he owned the world, made my stomach turn. He had that smug, arrogant look on his face, like he was so much better than everyone around him. He was way too comfortable in his own skin. I nearly confronted him right then, but something held me back. I knew he wasn't worth it. He and the woman with him were off to deal with some civil case, but I knew exactly what they were really up to. I had gotten a tip from a woman named Charlotte, a stranger, but she had filled in all the blanks. When Julia and Samuel turned down our offer to take them to the airport and chose his car instead, it stung. I had no idea when they'd be back. Physically, Samuel and I were about the same height and age. He was attractive in a clean-cut, polished way. But I wasn't afraid to face him. I was ready for a confrontation if it came to that. Olivia must have picked up on where my mind was going because without saying a word, she stepped in front of me and gently guided me away from making a scene. "Don't," she said, and I listened. I was grateful she was looking out for me. We waved them off from the porch, Julia likely already picturing her exciting weekend in the city with Samuel. The whole situation reeked of something off. Julia's promotion to associate partner 2 years ago had thrown our entire life off balance, and not in a good way. I could see how the power had gone straight to her head. And it wasn't just me who noticed it. I was the only one brave enough to speak up about it. I'd heard the whispers. Samuel had a reputation, but Julia never let it bother her. She brushed it off like it was nothing more than office gossip. She couldn't see what was staring her in the face. To her, this affair was just a way to break free from the monotony of our life. She wouldn't believe it until it was too late. I thought to myself, it'll hit her hard when she realizes she's just another name on his list. Olivia, now visibly concerned, asked, "Why didn't you do something, Dad? Why didn't you stop it?" I took a deep breath. Because, sweetie, if I warned her, she'd just brush it off as jealousy. You know how she is. It would have just started another pointless argument. Once her mind's made up, there's no changing it. Olivia looked at me, puzzled. "Does Samuel's wife know?" I nodded. "Yeah, Charlotte knows everything. So does her father. They've been waiting to catch him in the act. This isn't the first time for Samuel. Charlotte's aware of his past affairs, and she's done with it. Their kids are grown now, so she's ready to end the farce that's their marriage." Olivia seemed anxious, but she asked the next question anyway. "So, are you going to forgive Mom?" I didn't even have to think about it. "Not this time, kiddo. I forgave her once, but this is different. This time it's done. I'm moving on." I had already accepted that divorce was inevitable the moment she walked out that door. The look on Olivia's face when she heard that was one I'll never forget. She was shocked, and honestly, I couldn't blame her. She had no idea what had been going on beneath the surface. Learning about her mother's infidelity was a tough pill for her to swallow. "Dad," Olivia said softly, "you have to tell me more. What happened?" I sighed and pulled her close. "Look, Olivia, you're the youngest, so keep this between us. Okay? Before you were born, your mother had an affair. And I'm not talking about a one-time thing. She kept seeing him, even when she was pregnant with you. If you weren't mine, I would have left her then and there." Her eyes widened. "Who is he? Do we know him?" I hesitated before answering. "It's been 18 years since I spoke to him, but yeah, you know him. It's your Uncle George." Olivia processed the shock of the news, her mind trying to make sense of it all. She'd never understood why I always kept my distance from George. I could tell Olivia was still processing everything. She'd finally figured out why I always avoided family gatherings when George was around. Now, it all made sense to her. To lighten the mood a bit, I joked, maybe you should text Uncle George about Julia's trip and the hotel she's staying at. You know, just to stir the pot a little. Olivia didn't laugh. I could see the weight of everything starting to hit her. She didn't say anything, so I left her to think while I headed into the kitchen to make some coffee. Flipping through the local paper, I scrolled through rental listings and sales. With Olivia heading off to university soon, Julia could stay in the house until she graduated. But I needed to get things in motion before she came back. I had a feeling the judge would put the kids first, which meant I'd probably end up frustrated and resentful. Olivia's phone rang, and she spoke softly for a while before walking over to me. "Uncle George wants to talk," she said, her voice serious. "He knows everything, and he sympathizes with you. After all these years, I think it's time to hear him out." Julia's actions had made me rethink a lot of things. I'd stuck around in the marriage for the kids, trying to keep the family together, but now everything was different. I grabbed a bottle of Jack Daniels and asked Olivia to drive me. There were a lot of decisions to be made, and I wasn't sure I could do it alone. As we ate, Mom called. Both Olivia and George's wife, Claire, showed up shortly afterward. By the time they arrived, we were starting to sober up. Claire, who had married George after his separation, looked confused when she saw us sitting together. "Okay, so you two are back on good terms now?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. After all this time, we deserved to know what really went down. I was about to speak, but George nudged me. An old childhood gesture that told me to stay quiet. He'd always been better at telling stories to get us out of trouble. But this time, it was different. This time, I was the one who needed to own up to it. George cleared his throat. "Julia and we had an affair while she was pregnant with Olivia," he said, his voice calm but firm. "It was my fault. I was immature, stupid. When our younger brother found out, he saw me as dead to him." Dad, hearing the truth about why Julia and I had split, let out a curse. "Damn, if I were Thomas, I'd have taken you out myself." "What made you confess?" Mom asked, her voice sharp. I took a deep breath. "Julia flew out to New York with her boss," I said. "They only booked one hotel room for the whole trip, which raised a lot of red flags. Charlotte, Samuel's wife, has hired private investigators on them." Olivia, now fully aware of what was really going on, looked at me with understanding. "I should have let you confront him," she said, locking eyes with me. There was a moment of silence, and then I spoke again. "Since Julia is staying in the house until you graduate, I need to find a new place before she gets back." Olivia was firm. "I won't stay with Mom," she said. "Where you go, I go. We're sticking together." Her words were final. She meant it, no matter the consequences. Mom called to Olivia, telling her, "Come upstairs with me." And the two of them disappeared for a while. When they came back, they had made their decision. We'd be moving in with them for now. All we needed were our clothes. On the way home, Olivia gave me a knowing look. "You need to stop defending Mom, Dad," she said. "We're adults now." She knew exactly what she was doing in New York with Samuel. She thought she could get away with it, but it says a lot about how she sees us. That Monday night, we began packing up our things. We grabbed what we could. Olivia's favorite things, my rocking chair, and Julia's makeup table with the big mirror. Julia kept texting me throughout the week, updating me on her progress, though it was slow. Finally, Charlotte called and suggested we meet Thursday night at Jack's Roadhouse around 8. I showed up in work clothes, minus the tie, and saw her immediately by her white scarf. I introduced myself, and she was stunning. Several years younger than me, long blonde hair, soft blue eyes, and a slender figure dressed modestly. She told me she was a kindergarten teacher, which made sense, given how she was dressed. I worked as an HR manager at a nursing home. Charlotte mentioned that she and Samuel would be in New York for the weekend, having completed about 70% of the settlement work. When they return, They'll be served with papers, she said, and then asked, "How are you holding up?" "It's better this time," I replied. "We're talking openly about everything. Unlike last time when it wasn't even intentional. My older brother was the first to know 18 years ago before my youngest was born. We didn't speak for 18 years until we made amends last Sunday. Thanks to Olivia." Charlotte chuckled when I mentioned how my daughter had forced us to work through everything, even if it meant one of the worst hangovers I'd had in years. "What made it worse?" I added. "Was our dad catching us like a couple of teenagers and dragging us home?" Charlotte laughed, but then her expression softened. "It must have been comforting, though, to have your parents around," she said. I nodded. "Olivia and I will be staying with my parents for now, keeping only the essentials. I'm planning to keep Julia's number active until Sunday, then block her for good." Before we parted ways, Charlotte and I shared a dance at a nearby bar. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself in good spirits. When I got home, though, Olivia was already there, waiting to quiz me. She seemed to know everything. The next day, Olivia kept teasing me. "Daddy's got a new girlfriend," she said with a mischievous grin. She was joking, but I could tell there was a hint of truth in her words. We had a great Sunday dinner, and my parents were already settling in. It felt good to be together again, and Mom was happy to cook for us. For the first time in a long time, things felt okay. It felt nice to sit down for a meal that didn't leave leftovers. But at 1 a.m., my phone rang, jolting me out of sleep. Charlotte confirmed what I had already suspected. Julia and Samuel were asleep when the hotel detective entered their room. The entire thing had been filmed. Charlotte sent me a temporary copy of the video, and I felt a cold rush of anger as I watched it. I got up, dressed quickly, and went downstairs to make some tea. My mom joined me, and as I finished preparing my cup, she asked, "Is the water still hot?" I got up to make her tea, and as I did, I showed her the video on my phone. Her expression changed immediately as she watched, her face hardening. There was no denying what we saw. Julia and Samuel, both undressed under the sheets, their voices full of surprise, like deer caught in headlights. Mom immediately saved a copy of the video to her own phone. "We're done with Julia," she said, her voice firm and resolute. I couldn't help but smile a little at the look on her face when I told her about the civil suit. "Olivia and I blocked her number tonight," I told Mom. "We knew they'd be served with lawsuits soon." Mom took their phones and started going through the process of blocking them, her fingers moving quickly as she did. Drinking tea with my mom in the quiet of the night brought back old memories. Later, I gave instructions to the receptionist at the nursing home to block all calls from Julia. I had no intention of speaking to her again. Around 11, the receptionist called me. "She's calling every 20 minutes, she said, sounding a bit panicked. "What should we do?" "What's your mobile number?" I asked. When she gave it to me, I told her, "I'll send you a video clip. If she calls again, ask her for her cell number. If she gives it to you, send her the clip and tell her that Olivia and I got it last night." That was the last I heard from Julia that day. Before I left work, the receptionist confirmed, "I did what you asked." Once I sent it, the calls stopped. "If you or Olivia need anything, just let me know." "Okay." I nodded, thankful for her help. "Thanks." That evening, as Mom cooked and Olivia helped, I filled them in on what had happened at work. Just then, I got a text from an unknown number, supposedly from my mom, asking me to call her. It didn't take long to figure out it was probably Samuel's number. "I think your brothers will reach out around 8 tonight, I told Olivia. "Your mom will probably call them, too. They'll be at the house, and if they notice we're gone, they'll be surprised." I left a note for Mom, telling her she'd have to make Samuel move out, since his wife had kicked him out. Julia would never admit anything in front of the boys. "Hey, Dad, let's ditch our phones for a while," Olivia suggested. "That way, my brothers will have to call Mom to figure out what's going on." So we turned off our phones and enjoyed a peaceful evening, away from the drama. But not everyone else was so calm. Later, we heard that my sons had gone to the old house. They'd noticed my chair was missing and started searching around. It quickly became clear that Olivia and I had moved out when they found the note I'd left behind in the kitchen. They called us, but we didn't answer, which only frustrated them more. Their mother claimed she didn't know what the note meant. Eventually, they turned to Uncle George for answers. He hinted that maybe I didn't want to be found, given what Julia had done. They were shocked, but they didn't question how George knew so much. Meanwhile, the news of the breakup spread quickly through the family. By the end of the workday, my secretary told me that Ryan, my eldest, had called. He got straight to the point. "What's up, Dad? Where do you and Olivia live now?" "Not much has changed," I said. "What was wrong before is right now and vice versa." "Let's skip the philosophy, Dad," Ryan replied. "Just give me the facts. Check your texts," I told him. "That'll answer your question. Forward it to Jack. And if you want to talk, come by Grandpa's after dinner." I ended the call, sent him the video, and told Olivia. Within 10 minutes, Ryan replied, "Wow, I'll be at Grandpa's by 8. My parents excused themselves, leaving me alone with the kids to talk through the situation. The boys weren't taking their mother's actions seriously. "We all mess up, Dad," Ryan said. "Remember how many times you forgave us growing up?" Olivia's anger flared. "You may be my brothers, but you're both idiots," she spat. "It wasn't an accident. Mom and Samuel planned the whole thing. The hotel room was booked for Mr. and Mrs. Duce. Samuel booked it a week before they left." The look on my sons' faces was unforgettable as Olivia laid it all out. "We watched Mom leave the house, knowing exactly what she was going to do. She made him pick her up, looking all nervous," Olivia said bitterly. "Dad offered to take her to the airport, but no. She wanted to leave with him, flaunting it. We were probably the punchline of their jokes." She paused for a moment, then added, "She didn't know we knew. She didn't realize we saw right through them." I tried to explain why I hadn't confronted her sooner. "She would have just lied, Olivia. She would have denied it, made it worse. Your mother made it clear she was leaving. This wasn't a mistake. It was planned." "Dad, I knew 2 weeks before she left," I said. "Samuel's wife warned us, and we got the video an hour after they were served." I looked at my sons. The boys need to understand. Frustration bubbled up inside me as I looked at my kids. "Your mother didn't just betray me. She betrayed all of us," I said, my voice tight with emotion. "I'm seeing a doctor tomorrow for an STD test." My children stared at me wide-eyed, as if trying to process the weight of my words. "I need to do this," I continued. "I can't be sure she didn't have other lovers on the side. This may be the first time she's been caught." But her business trip raised too many questions. Jack frowned, disbelief in his voice. "Dad, you can't be serious. There's no way Mom had other lovers." I raised an eyebrow, letting the question hang in the air. "Given what we know, can you honestly trust her to tell the truth?" I asked. "Facts matter more than belief. If I test negative for an STD, that'll support what you think." They stayed silent, so I excused myself. "I need a coffee," I muttered, heading for the kitchen. My parents had been quietly listening in, and they both agreed with my approach. "Luke, you're handling this wisely," my father said. "Her job and travel history make it plausible she had other partners. Mediation meetings, business trips, they all provide opportunities. Even if she had separate phone lines, you can't rule out contact between them." I nodded. In a world where one truth can be another's lie, I can't just take her word for it. Just then, my phone rang. Stepping outside, I answered it. "Hi, Charlotte. What's going on?" She told me she'd spoken to Samuel. It hadn't gone well. "He doesn't understand why she wants a divorce," Charlotte said. "He thinks she should forgive and forget, but she made it clear she doesn't want him involved in our daughter's life." Samuel didn't seem to get it as usual. "He has no idea the damage he's caused," Charlotte said. "Julia's struggling now that she's unemployed. They'll be back Thursday to settle everything." "I blocked her number for Olivia and me," I said. "I also told the receptionist to reject her calls. She begged me to stop, so I sent her the video you gave me. Now she knows we're aware." It must have been tough for her to lose control like that, I thought. Charlotte told me she'd informed Samuel that his belongings were in the garage until he picked them up and that I'd changed the locks just to gauge his reaction. I also had a heart-to-heart with my kids, explaining why I'm getting tested. She added, "Do you honestly think your mother would confess if there were others?" Olivia and I kept taking things one step at a time as we finished moving out. When we wrapped up our conversation, we wished each other good night. As I walked back into the kitchen, everyone's eyes turned toward me. "I'm taking tomorrow off," I said, grabbing my jacket. "Got a lawyer appointment at 9 o'clock. I want those two served with lawsuits as soon as they land Thursday." I could see the weight of it all sinking in for my son. His eyes filled with tears, realizing how serious everything had become. My father spoke up, his voice firm. "Samuel won't be the first, but he'll be the last. I'd have handled the first one differently." "That's not true," Jack protested. "Mom denied it until we showed her the video." "You're clueless," my mother interjected. "Ever wonder why your father never spoke to Uncle George until now? They patched things up Sunday night." Olivia added, "George confessed. He admitted Dad didn't deserve it, but he did." I put the kettle on, giving my children a moment to process the news. They didn't leave until the kettle was boiling. With Olivia in bed, I took a moment to talk with my parents. "You'll be watching," my mother warned. "How you handle this will guide them." "I understand," I said. "I'll stay composed and let the lawyers handle it. I can't change the past, and it's beyond my control, unless I take drastic measures." "That's the right attitude," my father said, nodding in approval. "But in my eyes, Julia isn't worth risking jail time." "I agree," I affirmed, recalling George's sentiment. "She's not worth it." My father beamed with pride. "You're a better man than I was at your age. Your mother and I raised you well." At the lawyer's office, I explained everything. She seemed especially interested when I mentioned my wife's employer. "Did you know I once worked there?" she asked. "They have a strict code of ethics which I still abide by. We might consider suing the firm as well," she suggested. "We might not gain much beyond legal fees, but the lawsuit would put pressure on them." I agreed to let her proceed. The couple would be back from New York on the earliest flight Thursday. After paying her fee, she seemed optimistic. "This feels like Adam facing Goliath," I said, thinking about the company's size and reach. The family doctor was a little surprised when I asked for STD tests. "It's unexpected, but it's a smart move," he agreed. Unbeknownst to me, Ryan had already told his mother about the tests. He explained that, given the suspicions about Uncle George and Samuel, there were too many uncertainties about additional partners. He reassured his mom not to worry. Given her own history of deception, it was best to let things settle before talking to her. Meanwhile, the company my wife worked for was facing fines, and my lawyer was pursuing a $10 million settlement, using the partner's dismissal as an admission of guilt. When Julia and Samuel returned Thursday, they faced procedural formalities. My wife took a taxi home alone. A call from the doctor revealed I had a mild STD that required reporting, and Julia was legally obligated to disclose her sexual history. The lawsuit hit the news at 6 p.m., exposing their actions for all to see. I kept Olivia updated during her classes, and later, she filled her brothers in over dinner. She teased me about my date with Charlotte, a light-hearted jab I didn't mind. Charlotte greeted me warmly at Red Lobster, both of us dressed casually. "She finds you impressive," Charlotte chuckled, taking a sip of her drink. "My dad sees you as a rock star. If that doesn't humble Samuel, nothing will." "The lawyer I hired sees this as payback," I said, a wry smile tugging at my lips. "She's using her HR expertise to sue them for policy breaches. I can't wait to see their faces tomorrow." Charlotte mused. "It won't be a good day for them." She handed me an envelope. "These are statements from 5 of Samuel's former subordinates. They detail how he coerced them into satisfying his carnal desires." I glanced through the papers. "This strengthens my case," I said, my voice steady, but inside, I was buzzing. Originally, the lawyer had thought winning enough to cover her fees would be a success. But now we had the chance to expose a much broader pattern of misconduct. Charlotte and I spent the evening talking, bonding over shared experiences. I was grateful for her support, and as the night wore on, I felt like we were starting to build something meaningful between us. By the time I returned home close to midnight, I reflected on everything that had happened since Julia left. Making tea in the quiet of the night, I noticed Olivia sitting at the table, her eyes red, her face tear-streaked. I sat beside her and made her a cup, knowing how much this had hurt her. "It's okay to cry, Olivia," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. "It's part of the healing process. I'm surprised you held it together this long," I added, pulling her into a hug as the tears flowed. I let her cry until she was calmer. We finished our tea in silence, and she eventually spoke, her voice hoarse. "What was your dinner with Charlotte like?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. "It felt like the beginning of a promising friendship," I said, still processing everything. I told her about the statements Charlotte had given me, and how things were starting to turn in our favor. Olivia had more questions, and I answered as best I could. Later, I delivered the statements to my lawyer. She was excited about the new evidence and proposed turning it into a class action lawsuit to seek larger compensation for all the women involved. I agreed, wishing her luck. The following day, I heard from a friend that Julia and Samuel had a rough day. Despite the successful settlement, there was no sense of victory, just cold silence. That left me feeling oddly heartened. At least some of the people I worked with were supportive. Senior management had reached out to express their sympathies, and I took comfort in that. On the way home, I withdrew $1,000 in cash and surprised my mother with it. She gave me a knowing look. "This is a one-time thing, agreed?" she asked. I nodded, thankful for her understanding. Julia returned home to an empty house, her heart heavy. It was clear that no one wanted her there. Samuel had already isolated himself emotionally, and now she was an outcast too. Her mind kept spinning, trying to figure out how Luke had managed to find a former employee with insider knowledge of the legal maneuvers. She had always underestimated him. Sitting alone, she fixed herself a rye cocktail and pulled out the divorce petition, her hands trembling as she read it. As she skimmed the pages, reality hit hard. Luke and Olivia had known about the affair from the start. They had planned their exit together, and now she was left to face the consequences. Regret slowly crept in, and she sent a message to Luke and Olivia, hoping for some space to talk things through. But deep down, she knew it was too late to undo the damage. Ryan's words echoed in her mind. "You've made things worse for everyone." She flicked through the mail, and a letter from the health department caught her eye. It was a formal notification that I had contracted an STD. Overcome with emotion, Julia collapsed into tears. The nightmare wasn't over, it was just getting worse. Meanwhile, Samuel sat alone in a dimly lit bar, nursing his sorrows. Word of Charlotte's divorce filing had made its way to him, and he couldn't shake the anger and confusion. A fight broke out nearby, and in the chaos he was struck 3 times in the face. The words from his assailant rang in his ears. Luke's resentment. But Samuel, lost in his own misery, couldn't connect the dots. The deeper meaning behind the attack completely escaped him. That Saturday afternoon, I had a difficult conversation with Ryan. He was stubborn, having just consoled his distraught mother. He still insisted I should take Julia back for the sake of peace. After listening to him patiently, I finally spoke. "Imagine if you were married, Ryan, and found out your wife was being unfaithful. Would you still tell me to take her back?" Ryan fell silent, his eyes wide as realization hit. "Does that mean you think I'm insignificant?" I pressed, the weight of the question sinking in. His shocked expression told me everything I needed to know. "If you can't respect my decisions," I said, my voice firm, "don't come back." I left him to reflect on my words. His youthful impulsiveness mirrored my own past mistakes, and now he had to face the consequences. Ryan sought counsel from Uncle George, who shared his own story of youthful folly. "Your mother pursued me," George revealed, his voice heavy with regret. It led to 18 years of separation from my brother. There are always two sides to every story. Your dad is right. Your mother didn't get the STD from Samuel. She brought it home. She saw your father as insignificant after everything he did for the family. George's words were hard, but necessary. Fix this, Ryan, he warned, or you risk losing your father forever. Your mother had her chance at the firm where Julia and Samuel worked. Monday morning came with a strange sense of triumph. My lawsuit had been dropped, but I was still lauded for my successful settlements. Julia and Samuel, despite the ordeal, remained silent, their victory hollow. Samuel, nursing his injuries, shared the ordeal with Julia privately. Later, I found Julia standing by my car. She was worn out, weary, and desperate. Back off, she demanded, her voice raw. Samuel has his own troubles because of your vengeful streak. I have no idea what you're talking about, I said, shrugging, unaffected. He got attacked. Julia's face twisted in anger. The guy said he's your friend. He'll keep doing it. I couldn't help but laugh. If I knew who did it, I'd buy him a drink, I said. I'd buy them a whiskey, I said casually. Your lover got off lightly. If it were me, he'd be dead. Just then, a text from Charlotte arrived, urgent and demanding my immediate presence. Another followed with her address. I quickly replied, telling her I was on my way. As I left, Julia stood there, her voice sharp and biting. You're colder and crueler than I've ever seen, she said, her tone accusing. I stopped and turned to face her, my patience running thin. Enough, I said firmly. Get your lawyer, and let's finalize this divorce. Without waiting for a response, I turned and got in the car, finally done with her manipulation and self-pity. When I arrived at Charlotte's house, she was pacing, clearly upset. What's wrong? I asked, concern creeping into my voice. How can I help? Charlotte sighed heavily and revealed. Your dad's friend had Samuel punched, and he used your name. A grin spread across my face at the thought. My reaction seemed to ease some of her tension. Aren't you angry or worried? She asked, watching me closely. If I knew where he lived, I'd send him a thank-you bottle of whiskey, I quipped without hesitation. Charlotte let out a small laugh, and I couldn't help but pull her into a brief hug. She didn't resist. When I pulled back, I started to apologize, but she surprised me with a quick kiss on the cheek. They're inside, waiting to talk things out with you, she said, leading me by the hand into the kitchen. As we passed by a bedroom, Charlotte's daughters, Grace and Lily, peeked out, giggling. When I winked at them, they winked back, their playful spirits lifting the mood. In the kitchen, Charlotte's father, a tall, imposing man, greeted me. He had a calm yet commanding presence. I extended my hand with a smile. If it were legal, I'd send you a large bottle of whiskey as thanks. He shook my hand firmly. Think before doing anything foolish, he advised. My father's advice saved me a lot of trouble at your age. His words carried weight, and I nodded, grateful for the guidance. Once the introductions were made, he left with a young man who had apparently been involved in the earlier incident. Charlotte's daughters, Grace, 10, and Lily, 8, were eager to tell me about their favorite restaurant, a pizza place called Zizzy's. Kneeling to their level, I asked, would you let me treat you and your mom to dinner there? Their eyes lit up and they immediately agreed. I just need to call my mom to let her know I won't be home for dinner, I added, pulling out my phone. What for? They asked, curious. To let her know, I chuckled, dialing. Their giggles filled the air as I spoke to my mom, and their amusement continued as we made our way to the restaurant. As soon as we entered Zizzy's, the girls darted ahead, excited. While Charlotte grabbed the pizza, I stayed at the table with the girls. Grace leaned in, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. Are you Mom's boyfriend? She asked, her voice innocent. I smiled, unsure of where this was going. Just a friend, I said. Did you go on a date? She pressed. Not yet, I teased. But I'd need someone's permission first. Who? Lily asked, tilting her head. Yours and your sister's, I replied, earning a chorus of giggles. You can, Grace said confidently. Mom says she likes you, Lily added with a smile. When Charlotte returned, she found us laughing, her smile softening as she clearly appreciated the connection I had made with her daughters. After dinner, we returned to their house. I thanked the girls at the door, and as I prepared to leave, Charlotte called out. I turned back to find her on the porch, looking thoughtful. Before I could speak, she kissed me. A warm, unexpected gesture. Grace, peeking from the door, called out, You were going to ask him out. I smiled, explaining the conversation I'd had with her daughters while Charlotte was busy. We ended up sitting on the porch, talking like teenagers about our feelings and shared uncertainties. Despite the mutual interest, we agreed to take things slowly. Before I left, we made plans to take the girls to the town fair the following Saturday. Felt like a step forward, and I was looking forward to it, I said with a wry smile. Despite the chaos surrounding us, I felt a strange sense of peace, knowing I was moving forward with people who truly cared. Charlotte reassured Samuel that I wasn't behind the incident, explaining that I'd spent the day at the fair with her and the kids. Still, Samuel wasn't pleased. Reluctantly, I left Charlotte's place around 9 p.m., knowing we'd officially start dating the next day. Sunday afternoon, I picked up Charlotte and her daughters, and we headed to George's house, where the entire family had gathered. My parents, Olivia with her date, and George's family were all there, making it the first time I'd stepped into my brother's home since he got married. Claire was thrilled to welcome us, introducing Charlotte and her daughters to everyone with her usual warmth. They were quickly accepted, and the gathering soon became lively and full of good energy. Later, my eldest son, Ryan, asked if we could talk privately. We moved to the edge of George's property, away from the commotion. Dad, I messed up, Ryan admitted, his voice heavy with regret. I fell for Mom's manipulation. She tricked me. Uncle George and a colleague filled me in last week. What did you learn from this? I asked, genuinely curious about his takeaways. Ryan sighed deeply. When it comes to family, sometimes it's best to just step back. No matter what you do, you might only make things worse. People need to figure things out on their own time. You're right, I acknowledged. But it's hard to step back when you care. Your mom and I will talk someday, but not anytime soon, not after how she's acted. His eyes searched mine for understanding. Her behavior? He asked quietly. Yes, I said, my voice steady. Actions speak louder than words. Look at Charlotte. She endured a loveless marriage until she felt ready to raise her daughters on her own. She showed patience, strength, and integrity, waiting for the right moment to act. That reflects her character. Your mom's actions, on the other hand, shocked your sister and me with their cruelty. Despite her words, her behavior contradicted them at every turn. As my grandfather used to say, if I'm not worth the truth, then you're not worth lying to. Ryan hesitated for a moment before asking, what else did she lie about? That's a question we might never fully answer, I said. There's no point dwelling on the past, son. All we can do is learn from it and move forward. Ryan managed a small smile. I'm really impressed by Charlotte, Dad. But the more I hear about Samuel and Mom, the more I think they belong together. Olivia approached us then, noting, your conversation is drawing attention. Maybe save it for later. We're done, sis, Ryan assured her. I just needed to apologize to Dad. With that, he walked away, leaving Olivia with a look of curiosity. It's just him saying the wrong thing, I explained. But it's good to see him owning up to it. As the afternoon progressed, George and Claire hosted a delightful dinner. Claire captured several candid moments with her camera, including one where Lily insisted on keeping an eye on me when the inevitable water fight broke out. I eagerly joined, though it left me completely soaked. Resting in a lounge chair to dry off, Lily climbed into my lap and promptly fell asleep. Across the yard, I noticed Claire and Charlotte talking quietly, likely discussing the bond forming between me and her daughters. My father joined me, gesturing to Lily. Seems this little one has chosen you, he said with a grin. Just be careful. Make sure revenge on Samuel isn't your motive. I recounted my relationship with Charlotte, from her first call to where we were now. My father nodded, thoughtful. I should have trusted my instincts from the start, he admitted. After a pause, he added, Your mother asked me to have this conversation with you. Whatever path you choose, know that you have our support. Thanks, Dad, I said, feeling grateful. We discussed society for a while, touching on everything from shifting values to the state of modern media. My father remarked on the hypocrisy of current political narratives. The media's become a propaganda machine, he said, shaking his head. It's tough to find honesty these days. People are too blinded by it all. His words resonated deeply, but we eventually returned to lighter topics. The evening wound down with shared laughs and promises to meet again soon. On Monday, while I was in my office, a detective came by to discuss the ongoing issue with Samuel Black. It took nearly an hour to explain everything I knew and provide a list of women whose spouses had discovered Samuel's affairs. Officer, I suggest you talk to Emily Blake, I said. She can give you a more comprehensive list. The detective seemed surprised at the extent of the situation. It's been 6 weeks since I learned about their relationship, I explained. Samuel's wife, Charlotte, called to inform me of their plans. It's been at least 4 weeks since they went on that romantic trip together. Since then, Charlotte and I have grown closer, trying to navigate a relationship that's completely new for both of us. That certainly paints a different picture, the detective said, his tone thoughtful. Samuel Black claims you're to blame for ruining his marriage, but it seems like his actions were the ones that caused the damage. I smirked. Samuel seems like the type to blame everyone but himself. The detective nodded. It's clear he's trying to deflect responsibility. But from what I've gathered, his accusations seem more about guilt than anything else. As the detective left, I couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. At least people were starting to see the truth about Samuel, the truth he'd been desperately trying to hide. I felt a sense of closure begin to form for the first time in months. For the first time in a long while, the path ahead seemed clearer, with Charlotte by my side and my family starting to heal. After the detective left, I called Emily Blake to update her. She wasn't surprised. Samuel's the type to set others up, she said matter-of-factly. I believe he orchestrated my dismissal from the firm and is likely trying to manipulate the situation again. Emily also told me that Julia had finally hired a lawyer. When I returned home to my parents, I learned it was my mother's letter to Julia's relatives that had pushed her to give up. Until that point, Julia had held onto the hope that we could somehow make it work. Once I'd calmed down, I realized that Julia probably thought I'd sent the letter out of spite. It wasn't my style, but I didn't feel the need to correct her assumption. On Wednesday, Olivia and I took Charlotte and her daughters to dinner at Olive Garden. My sons joined us, making it a lively, chaotic gathering. During the meal, I casually mentioned that Julia had finally retained a lawyer for her divorce. Charlotte's daughters seemed particularly drawn to Olivia, hanging on her every word, which Olivia clearly enjoyed. Overall, Charlotte and I considered the evening a success. 2 months passed since our last family meeting. On a Friday afternoon, I found myself sitting next to Emily outside Judge Peter McPeter's courtroom. Across the hall sat Julia and her lawyer, who happened to work at her old firm. We had already agreed on the property division. There was no mortgage on the house, so Julia would buy out my share based on the current appraisal and give me half of our joint savings. When we were called before the judge, we confirmed the agreement, finalizing the divorce. Outside, as I was heading to the parking lot, Julia stopped me. I ruined myself, she said softly. I finally admitted my behavior to our sons. Olivia still won't speak to me because she thinks I did it all on purpose. I wish I'd realized sooner the message I was sending. I looked at her steady. I could accept that explanation from Olivia. She's young and inexperienced. From you, though, it just sounds self-centered. Without another word, I left. Charlotte's divorce was already finalized. She had managed to get everything she could from Samuel. He was ordered to pay $1,000 a month in child support, $1,500 for each daughter until they turned 18, and cover half of their post-secondary education costs. Their house was to be sold, with the profits split equally. Samuel had left the firm and moved to another city to start his own business. Word was, the frequent, unexpected encounters with fists had left him physically drained. Still, with his share of the company, he was financially set for life. My parents invited Charlotte and her daughters over for dinner. What I didn't know was that they had also invited her parents. Given how things were progressing between Charlotte and me, my parents felt it was time to start building bridges with her family. Dinner was warm, lively, and filled with easy conversation. Afterward, as we relaxed at the formal dining table, a table that hadn't been used in years, I stood up, pushed back my chair, and got down on one knee. Pulling out the ring box, I asked, "Charlotte, will you take a second chance and marry me?" Completely stunned, Charlotte managed to say yes. That's when the real celebration began. My mom immediately called George, Claire, and my two sons to share the news. Within half an hour, they had all arrived, adding to the joyful chaos. Amidst the excitement, I noticed Lily sitting quietly on the floor, tears streaming down her face. Concerned, I walked over and sat down beside her. She climbed into my lap without hesitation. "What's wrong, baby?" I asked softly. "Nothing," she said, wiping her eyes. "I'm just happy that you're going to be my dad." I looked over at Charlotte, who had tears in her eyes as well. I think she could see the emotion in mine, too. Standing up, I carried Lily over to her mother. Everyone seemed to understand the significance of the moment. Grace joined us, standing next to me. "Dad," she said shyly, "when you and Mom get married, will we take your last name?" "As soon as the court allows," I assured her. My father chimed in, "Grace and Lily, from now on, you can call us grandparents. Okay?" The girls lit up at the thought of spending time on the farm. My father promised to teach them to ride horses in no time. Later, in private, Charlotte asked, "How do you plan to convince Samuel to let me adopt the girls and change their last names?" "Leave it to me," I said with a confident smile. About a month later, I showed up unexpectedly at Samuel's office. His secretary hesitated but eventually let me in. Closing the door behind me, I saw a man who looked nothing like the confident attorney I once knew. His face, still healing from multiple punches, bore visible signs of his recent encounters. Samuel's glare said it all. "What do you want?" he asked, voice cold. I stood firm. "I want to adopt Charlotte's daughters and give them my last name. That's it." He leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly. "Why should I let you?" "Because you've already walked out of their lives," I said evenly. "They deserve a father who's present and responsible. It's not about you anymore, Samuel. It's about them." His expression hardened, but he didn't argue. "I'll think about it." I knew that was the best I was going to get for now. As I left his office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. Samuel could blame me all he wanted for his failures, but the truth was undeniable. He'd made his own bed. Now, it was time for me to focus on building a better future with Charlotte and the girls. "I think you've heard that Charlotte and I are getting married," I said to Samuel, whose face drained of color. It was clear he suspected me of orchestrating his injuries. "What do you want?" he asked nervously. "I need your permission, in the form of a legal document, to adopt your daughters so they can take my last name," I explained, trying to keep my tone level. "This isn't just for me." Grace asked her mother and me if she and Lily could have my name. "It has to be done legally, recognizing both of us as their fathers." Samuel glared at me, then asked, "Why should I agree?" "This will get you away from me for good," I said bluntly. "Otherwise, we'll be seeing a lot of each other." It took him half an hour to draft and print the document. His secretary, a notary, certified it. I wasn't surprised by his reluctance. Samuel hadn't seen his daughters since he left for New York. Charlotte had told me he'd only married her because of family pressure when she got pregnant. Later that day, I arrived at the kindergarten where Charlotte taught. Since I wasn't known there, I asked the office staff to call her. She came in, surprised to see me. "Charlotte," I began, handing her an envelope. I made a promise to your daughters on the day of our engagement. This will help us fulfill it. She opened the envelope and read the document, her eyes filling with tears. How did you manage this? She asked, voice trembling. Samuel still thinks I'm responsible for his face meeting fists. I replied with a hint of a smile. I used that fear to our advantage. I thought we could make it so Grace and Lily legally take my last name on our wedding day. Charlotte smiled again, her voice cracking with emotion. Olivia told me the night we got engaged that you always keep your word, especially to kids. Do you think Emily Blake will handle the adoption papers? I asked, pulling out my phone. I can call her office now to set an appointment. The school secretary, overhearing us, asked, Have you two set a date yet? Charlotte smiled again. Not yet. Luke wouldn't commit until he found a way to convince Samuel to let him adopt the girls. He wanted the kids to get what they wanted. That afternoon, we met with Emily, who was thrilled for us. She prepared the necessary documents, which were filed the same day. Within a week, the court approved the adoption and name change. All that remained was deciding when it would take effect. We chose our wedding day. At a family meeting, we finalized our plans. On Sunday, we gathered at George's home for a potluck brunch. Charlotte brought Boston baked beans, and the mood was lively. After the greetings, Charlotte's father asked, What's new? We're happy to announce that in 2 weeks, 6 days before Christmas, 2 big things will happen, I said. First, Charlotte and I will exchange vows. Second, the adoption of Grace and Lily will be completed, and they'll officially take the name Foster. Charlotte added, For our honeymoon, we're taking the girls to either Disneyland or Disney World next summer. The room erupted in cheers. Later, during a quiet moment, Grace climbed into my lap and said softly, Thank you, Dad. For what? I asked, touched. For loving us enough to keep your word, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was speechless, holding her close. Across the room, I caught Charlotte's tearful gaze and knew she saw the emotion in my eyes, too. Later, in private, Charlotte asked how I planned to convince Samuel to finalize the adoption. Leave it to me, I said confidently. A month later, I arrived unannounced at Samuel's new office. His secretary hesitated but eventually let me in. Samuel, still recovering from his injuries, looked worn down. What do you want now? He asked. I want to adopt Grace and Lily, I said plainly. Why should I let you? He asked coldly. You've already stepped out of their lives, I replied. They deserve a father who's present and responsible. This is for them. After a long pause, Samuel finally said, Fine, do what you want. I left his office feeling a sense of relief. Samuel could blame me all he wanted, but his failures were his own. My focus was on building a loving, stable future for Charlotte, Grace, Lily, and me. A family bound by trust and love.